In the logical framework, as shown on the screen now, the evaluation is concerned with the higher levels of the hierarchy of objectives. So evaluation is looking at how these outputs are going to bring about the outcomes and how these outcomes are going to help us to contribute to the goal. Evaluation is not concerned with the activity. Please, no, when you enter room, no moving, no close doors again. I do something, yeah, at the record. So when you enter room now, no closing the door again. If you enter room, just stay there. When I finish, I'll call you. No bang door. What you're looking at now is a logical framework, and we want to see. Let's now look at evaluation. In the logical framework, evaluation is concerned. Let's now look at evaluation. The evaluators during evaluation are going to demand for the original project document because they want to see the logical framework. And in the logical framework, they are looking at how the outputs that you described from the beginning are bringing about the change in the outcomes and how that outcomes or those outcomes and how those outcomes are going to contribute to the goal. The evaluation is not concerned with the activities or output, but they are looking at is a causal relationship. But they are looking at is a causal relationship between the outputs and outcomes correct, and is a causal logic between the outcomes and goals correct. According to the PMD Pro guide and in the international development sector, there are typically 3 types of evaluation that we will be carrying out. We have the real time, which is also known as the midterm review. And then we have the final evaluation, which is also known as the end of project evaluation. And then we have the ex post or post-project evaluation. Real-time evaluation is usually conducted by an internal evaluator. So this will be done by the organizations or members of the project team, the monitoring and evaluation team within the organization. Midterm reviews or real-time evaluation are conducted throughout the project because you're trying to improve on how well things are being done. This evaluation is not looking at passing out blames or passing judgment, but you're just trying to see how to improve further on that project. The final evaluation, this is conducted at the end of the project. And the purpose of this evaluation is for judgment. You're largely passing out judgment on the value of that project. You're trying to prove the merit or the value of the project based on the amount of resources that have been spent on that project. We want to see if the change we are seeing compared to how much we've spent is worth it. And this, because your passing judgment is generally conducted by an external evaluator, because you don't want your internal evaluators to come and show bias in the project. The final evaluation involves more planning and investment, so it has to be budgeted for in your budget during the identification and design phase. The ex post or post-project evaluation is conducted at a time after project has completed. Maybe 2-3 years after the project has ended, the donor can direct that you carry out an ex post evaluation. This evaluation is done to look at impact. It is trying to see if the impact that was generated by the project is still being maintained by the community members or the beneficiaries. And it is especially useful when advocating for interventions in a specific program or portfolio area. This evaluation is not conducted as regularly as the final evaluation. Now let us look at monitoring. Monitoring focuses on the activity and output level of the logical framework. Monitoring is trying to look at these activities that I've conducted. Is it bringing us the right results? Where are we supposed to be in terms of the outputs that we're supposed to see on the logical framework? A typical monitoring and evaluation plan would have a column for hierarchy of objectives, the indicators, the definition of terms, the sources of information, the methods of collection, who will collect, frequency of collection, and users. The hierarchy of objective column and the indicators column are lifted directly from the logical framework without making any change to it. In the monitoring and an evaluation plan, it is very important for you to pay attention to the definition of terms column, because if the indicators are not properly defined, then the people who are going to be collecting that data are going to make mistakes on it. For instance, if one of the indicators that you are going to collect is the number of households that were reached, it's important for you to define properly what constitutes a household. Is it a single family with two parents and their children, or would it also include the extended family members who are living in that compound? There are 6 elements of monitoring and evaluation that you need to pay attention to. The elements are indicators, schedule and budget, staff and partners, a full data cycle, data management, and linking to the next level. Indicators should always be clearly defined, baselined, and systematically measured. And it is important for you to allocate time and resources for all M&E tasks. And as much as possible, clearly identify responsibilities for everyone who is working on that project. And always maintain a full data cycle that starts with collection and ends with feedback. So you would have collection, you would have the data review, you have the data summary, data analysis, and feedback on the data. And when you've collected your data, it's important to think about how do you want to store this data. As much as possible, you need to ensure that as much as possible, you need to ensure that the data is stored properly and it still has integrity. And your data should be able to link to the next level. There have to be a connection between this data and your other projects and programs. How are these data going to help you improve on the projects and programs that you have running in the organization? Let us look at the cost and complexity of data collection. This graph now is showing you the different tools or methods of data collection from this graph is showing you the different methods of data collection from the least expensive to the most expensive. As we can see now, that the least expensive method of data collection is observation, and the most expensive method of data collection is special or point sample surveys. So observation is the least method, followed by existing records, and then we have routine statistics, and then we're now moving towards the primary qualitative data, which is key informant interviews, focus group discussions, specific sample surveys, and special or point studies. And remember that the effort expended or the method of data collection you want to choose should match the improvement in decision making. Activity-based budget can help you monitor your project. Budgets are able to help you show variances, okay? The gap between how much was budgeted and what was actually expended. Now, as we can see on this budget, we have activities that have been taken out from the WBS that has cost on them, and they have been listed on the activity description column. And then we also have the cost per quarter for each of these activities. Now, if a budget holder or a project manager is looking at your budget, they can tell if your budget is going on well or you've overspended or underspended by looking at how much was budgeted for you to spend per activity in the quarter and how much you have actually gone ahead to spend on that quarter or time period. One of the ways for you to monitor the cost of a project is to do what we call the end value analysis. End value analysis, also known as EVA, is a tool that compares the planned and actual cost for each task that has been performed and also compares the rate of progress on each task to what was scheduled in the project plan. In order for you to do an end value analysis, you will need a more complete set of data that combines elements of both the project budget and the project calendar. Now, like I told you earlier, the budget can show you variance between what was budgeted and what was actually expended. Now, if your manager looks at the budget, he or she can say you are overspending or underspending. But if they did an end value analysis, they may actually see that you might have not overspended or underspended on that budget. Because the end value analysis will look at how much of the activities have you actually carried out based on what you had in your development plan, in your detailed implemented, based on what you have in your detailed implementation plan. Okay? And they will now compare that with what you have on the budget. And so they may see that, okay, some of the activities that you ought to have done in Q4, you have decided to do them now in Q2, perhaps maybe as a result of the prevailing information or new information that you have. So they may see that you may have overspended or underspended. End value analysis. Now, like I told you earlier, the budget is able to show variance. And when you look at the budget, one can tell whether each item on the budget line is being overspent or underspent. And if your finance manager is looking at it, they may flag you and say you are overspending on an activity or you are underspending on activities on your project. But if they did an end value analysis, because the end value analysis will require that they compare the rate of progress of the activities in your detailed implementation plan to what you have on your budget. And so they may see that based on the amount of activities that you've already done in your detailed implementation plan, you are actually not overspending or underspending. Perhaps you might have, say you had 10 activities that you needed to do in a quarter, And so you have gone ahead to do those 10 activities, and because you still had time, you decided to carry out some activities that you would have done the next quarter, and you're bringing them to start doing now. And that is why it's looking as if you are overspending, whereas in actual sense, you're still on track on the budget. Now, in our work as project managers in the development sector, one of the things that people always complain about is their burn rate. Some people complain that their burn rate is too high, others complain that their burn rate is too low, that they are overspending or underspending. Now, there are three scenarios that you'd find yourself as a project manager managing NGO projects. You're going to find yourself either under budget, on budget, or over budget. Now, the M value analysis is saying that whenever you find yourself under budget and behind schedule, it is not good and it is not bad. You need to provide more information as to why you are not spending the budget and you are also not moving as fast as you should be in your work plan. But when you are underspending and you are on schedule, it is good. When you are underspending and ahead of schedule, it is good. When you are on budget and you are behind schedule, it's a very bad situation to be. When you are on budget and on schedule, it is good. When you are on budget and ahead of schedule, it is good. When you are over budget and behind schedule, it is bad. When you are over budget and on schedule, it is bad. So we see that over budget, whether behind schedule or on schedule, is a bad thing, or it's a bad situation for you to be. And then when you are over budget and ahead of schedule, you need to provide more information as to why you are not moving according to the pace which you've already set out during the planning phase. Now, the best position to be when managing finances and scope in a project is to be on budget and on schedule. That is the ideal. This is what you should target to be on budget and to be on schedule. Now let's talk about control. In managing projects, there are going to be times where you will need to make some changes on the project. And if you are not careful, and if you do not have systems in place that will help you ensure that only approved changes are made, you may end up losing track of that project. And you will have what we call scope creep, whereby a situation whereby the scope of the project keeps expanding and expanding, and you have lost control of it. In order for you to take control of your project, you need to have project control measures. Project control helps you to manage variance. It helps you to compare the actual progress to tasks and how it helps you to compare the actual progress to tasks in the detailed implementation plan. It helps you to manage decision-making processes needed to change the scope, schedule, and or budget. And project control processes help you to manage documentation and communication of such changes when they need to be made. Now, in order for you to ensure that only approved changes are made, you need to use what we call tolerances. Project tolerance in project management is the performance limit with which a project manager has autonomy on a project. It is a limit with which you have the authority to exert autonomy on your project. Most times in our projects and in most organizations, the only tolerance levels that they set for project managers is the financial tolerances, whereby they tell you that as a project manager, you are able to spend or approve checks or expenses that are up to a certain amount of money. That whenever it is above that amount of money that has been given to you, you need to seek the approval of another person who has a higher approval limit than you. Now, we are saying that it is important that you go beyond certain tolerances for costs and expenses. You need to set tolerances for time, for scope, for risks, for quality, and the benefits. So whenever you're taking up a new project, you need to meet with your supervisors and ask them and say, okay, how much can I approve on this project without coming to you? What certain changes can I make on the implementation plan without seeking approval from you? If, for instance, you've been asked to target beneficiaries of, say, 1,000 beneficiaries, you need to ask them and say, what if we are unable to reach the 1,000 beneficiaries? What if we're able to get 900 or 950 persons? Is it still acceptable on the project? Or what if we're able to reach more than the 1,000 beneficiaries that was specified on the project? Is it allowed within the project? Can I go ahead and make those changes without getting approval from you? You also need to discuss with your direct supervisor to identify situations that will require escalation. Because where you are going to be working, sometimes you'll be in hard to reach locations where you might not have internet connectivity. And so how now do you reach the persons how now do you reach your supervisors to seek the approval on the project? You also need to use a governing structure. Get a board on the project or a sponsor, somebody who will be taking decisions on that project. And then you also need to make sure that the participation of stakeholders continues to be honored in any changes. And you need to carefully document the issues and management challenges that justifies any changes that you make on the project. One of the ways for you to manage change is through a tool called the Integrated Change Control Map. Now, this map helps you to identify and manage when changes occur or need to occur. They help you to ensure that only approved changes are implemented. And then it also helps you to update the scope, cost, budget, schedule, or quality requirements, and also to document the complete impact of requested changes. Let's take a look at a change request map, the processes that go through on a change request map. Now, as we can see, this is where the change is requested. So an individual or a group is requesting that changes should be made on the project. Now, you need to look at, first of all, we are saying that these diamond-shaped boxes are decision gates that you have to reach before any change is made. And so a request has been submitted to you about certain changes on the project. You don't just give approval or disapproval without looking at, is this change allowable within the contract that we had with these partners? And if the change is allowable, you ask them to update plans to implement so you ask them to update the documents based on the change. So if the change is allowable within the contract, you go ahead and update your documents. The next thing you want to do is you need to assess the impact that these proposed changes is going to have on your schedule, on your resources, on your costs, and quality. Do you like the impact that you've seen? Do you like the impact that you've seen? If it is a yes, you go ahead to the next level. If it is a no, you return back to develop new action and address change. Now, if you like the impact, you also need to understand and check again. You also need to check if you will require the donor approval before you make those changes on the scope of the project. If you require donor approval, you go and seek the donor's approval. If you don't, you go back to update your plans, implement changes, and close out documentation. Controlling is like juggling. As a project manager, you are juggling different balls. If you spend so much time on one ball, then you're going to lose the rest of the balls. So as a project manager, you'll be working on scope management, be working on project resource management, time management, justification management, stakeholder management, and risk management at the same time. All the disciplines of project manager, of all the disciplines of project management, you will be paying attention to them. This wraps up this module. If you have any questions or comments, don't forget to reach out to me and I'll get back to you with the answers. Thank you for joining and see you in the next module. Welcome to Module 7, and this is the last module of our training. We've come a long way to get to this point, and I'm very appreciative of how far you've come with us on this journey. Now we are on the transition phase. But I'd like you to take a look at the quote on the screen. It says, "Life is pleasant, death is peaceful. It is a transition that is troublesome." In project management, transition can be troublesome if it is not done properly. And remember that transition phase, which is circled here, is the last phase, the end of project. Now remember that the end of project transition phase, which is circled here, is the last phase of the project phase model. Is the last phase of the PMD Pro phase model. I'd like to remind you that you are only as good as you finish, because a project is a temporary endeavor having a defined beginning and an end. If you're only good at starting and you're unable to close out your project effectively, then you will not be considered a good project manager. And remember that people often forget things that you did earlier, and they will only remember the later phases of the project. In project management, we have 4 transition scenarios that we'll find ourselves. The first one is termination. Under termination, here, the project has formally ended and all project closure activities are completed. Sometimes your project may not have ended, but because the project has challenges, the donor could ask you to hand over to another partner organization for them to complete those activities. That is also a part of termination. Another scenario that we'll find ourselves is the extension scenario. Under extension, you have 2 types. You have the cost extension or the no cost extension. In a no cost extension scenario, here for instance, you have activities that are still left for you to carry out, and you still have monies and resources still unspent. So you write to the donor and say, we require additional time to complete these activities that we have on our work plans. So you're only asking for additional time to finish the scope of the project. But in the cost extension scenario, you are asking for both time and resources to complete the scope of the project. So maybe in the course of the implementation of the project, the donor made some changes or added things to the scope of your project. So you're writing to them to say we require money, or you're writing to them to say we require additional resources in order to finish the activities. The expansion scenario, which is another expansion scenario, another transition scenario that we'll find ourselves is the expansion scenario. Here, the team identifies what elements of the project to replicate, or the team identifies new target area or population. So in this scenario, while you're implementing your project, you discover that you want to replicate some elements of what has been successful in that project to a different area or to a different demographic. Or you are saying we're working in a particular location, and because of some new development, we want to extend our services to another location. So you're expanding the project from one location to another location, or you're replicating some elements of this your project in another area or with another group of persons. In the redesign scenario, here the project has ended, but it is continued via a new phase with modified intervention. So you had this orphan and vulnerable children, it has ended after 4 years, and then the donor re-awarded you and is calling it phase 2. But they are now making some certain changes on the previous model that you implemented. The transition planning matrix is a tool that will help you to prepare during the transition phase. And one of the things you have to look out for is that you need to plan transition from the earliest phases. From the very beginning, perhaps during the identification and design phase, you need to begin to think about what type of transition do we envision. And it is always very important during planning for your transition phases, okay, for the transition scenarios, to be very transparent with the donor, especially as regard to funding. It's very important that you're transparent with your funding, how much you've received, how much you've expended, and how much is still left in your accounts. And the challenges you would face here is to balance firm commitments with flexibility. Another component of this matrix is developing local linkages. And the key questions you need to consider is, do we have the right partnerships? And the guiding principles that you need to follow is, whenever you want to enter partnerships with people, you must ensure that your partners or your intended partners and you share clear and common goals. The challenges that you will face here is how to support local partners, especially when you are an international organization. You also would need to think about building capacity. And key questions you need to ask is, what capacities exist and are needed? And the guiding principles is, you must build on existing capacities where possible. And the challenges you would face is, how do we monitor and track the capacity building processes of these people that we've trained? So another component that we're going to look at is mobilize local resources. And the key questions is what inputs are needed to be the key question to look at is what inputs are needed to maintain services. And the guiding principles is procure resources locally where possible. And the challenge you would face is that the challenge you would face is a difficulty in finding adequate local resources. And during transitioning, it's important to stagger phase out. What are the project key elements? What are the project key elements? The guiding principle is flexibility. And the challenges are insufficient time to see intended impact. And the final consideration is allow roles to evolve after transition. And the key questions is the types of ongoing support that you have to be providing. And the guiding principles here is you need to prevent slippage of intended results. But the challenge you will face is you may not have the resources for providing ongoing support for the population. During the transition phase, you're going to be carrying out verification of the project scope and the confirmation of the acceptance of deliverables. You need to go back to your WBS and to check if you have carried out all the activities that you broke down during the planning phase. And this is where you will need to meet the beneficiaries and even the donor for them to provide you feedback if they accept the quality, if they accept the results, if they are pleased with the changes that they have seen on the project. When in the transition phase, you're going to be carrying out 3 project closeout activities. You're going to be carrying out administrative project closeout, financial project closeout, and contractual project closeout. Under the administrative, your concern will be, have all people been released or reassigned? Have archives or files been set up for the project? Have equipment, facilities, vehicles, and so on been sold or reallocated? And under the financial closeout activities, you're going to be checking if you've received all donor funding. You're going to be checking if you've received all donor funding. You're going to be checking if everyone who received advances or payments have all retired those advances. And you're going to be checking if all payables have been paid in the organization. And under the contractor closeout, you're going to be looking at, have all contracts that we signed with contractors and vendors been closed out? Has the donor received, reviewed, and accepted the deliverables? Another activity you'll be carrying out during the transition phase is the end of project learning. It's very important in project management that you learn before, during, and after projects. And all the learning that you're making, all the knowledge and data that you gather during the project should help you inform decision-making around the project and other projects in your organization, so that you do not go about reinventing the wheel every time you have a new project. After action review is a learning activity. After action review is a learning activity. After action review is a learning activity that is usually carried out during the transition phase. It is a simple, quick, and versatile learning activity, relatively straightforward to organize and implement, and it helps participants to understand what was planned versus what actually happened. After action review is not a gathering where you go and apportion blames to members of your team, but you're looking at what did we plan, what did we achieve, why did you think it worked, why did you think it didn't work. It's very simple and it's straightforward. And just like you launch the project, you also need to have an opportunity to celebrate achievements on your project. You need to officially recognize project closure. You also need to acknowledge social relationships and celebrate successful results and impact of the project. With this, we've come to the end of our PMD Pro course. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your participation throughout all. Thank you for your participation throughout all the 7 modules of this course. And don't forget to complete your assignments and quizzes as part of this course. And I wish you good luck in your PMD Pro certification exams.